The screen glared back at me. $150,000. My deposit for our first house. Blocked. Canceled. The notification didn't come from the bank. It came from the family real estate holding account. Jessica's account. Tonight was the 30-year anniversary gala for their empire. I was supposed to wear a silk dress and smile. Instead, I stared at a wire transfer cancellation that threatened to ruin my future. If you've ever had a family member sabotage your success just to keep you beneath them, tell me where and what time you're listening to this. I picked up my keys. I drove away from the bank in silence. The rain in Seattle was steady, washing down the windshield in heavy sheets. Most people would have pulled over to cry. They would have called their parents, demanding answers. They would have screamed into the steering wheel. I didn't do any of that. I drove straight to my office. The brass plaque on the door read, Emily Hayes, Forensic Title Examiner. It was a quiet job. I spent my days reading the fine print that other people ignored. I unlocked the door, letting the familiar scent of old paper and stale coffee ground me. I didn't turn on the overhead lights, just the small desk lamp. I booted up my secure terminal. The hum of the processor was the only sound in the room. 10 minutes later, the door opened. David walked in.
Я
He didn't ask what
любитель
was wrong.
перестановок.
He didn't
Я
offer
вообще
empty
ненавижу
platitudes. He just took off his wet coat, walked over to the small kitchenette, and started the kettle. David was a software engineer. He understood the language of logic, the binary nature of a problem. A thing was either true or false. Right now, the block transfer was true.
Да.
He placed a mug of
Но
Earl Grey on my desk.
когда ты
Careful not to
привык
cover
там
any of the ledgers I had
поворачивать
pulled from the
направо, тебе
archives.
нужно лево,
He
мне
pulled up a chair and sat
жопа
beside me.
горит.
They triggered a hold on
Или
the escrow
когда в
account.
телефоне, знаешь,
said.
ты
My
удалил
voice
какое-то
didn't shake.
приложение, сейчас значки
Jessica
немножко
authorized it using the
сместились.
primary holding
То
company's
есть
bypass
ты
clause.
как бы
David took a sip
пальцы
of his tea.
нажимаешь все время направо,
clause
а
Robert
он
signed
немножко
blindly last year.
левее. Такой, бля.
I nodded. The one that gives her emergency oversight of all familial assets. David looked at the screen.
Так,
What do you need me
что
to
от меня
do?
требуется?
He didn't say he would fix it for me. He knew I didn't need saving.
Еще
I
Рапити
needed an
хотела
Just sit here,
сказать.
I told him. I need to trace the routing numbers. If she pulled
Делай
$150,000
сразу.
from an
Так не
external
нормально.
escrow,
Похуй.
she left a digital paper trail.
Просто надо
I began typing.
запомнить.
The numbers reflected in the dim light of the office. For
Так,
years,
минералы нужно
I had let them treat me like the
фармить.
boring younger sister, the paper girl. I had let them define my worth by how easily I faded into the background. Jessica sold the dream with handshakes and bright smiles.
Кто на чём
I verified the
сидит?
dirt underneath it. Numbers do not lie. Numbers do not play favorites. And tonight,
Если что, вопрос
I
не
was
к
going to let the
чату.
numbers speak. The screen populated with a dozen
Так,
encrypted transactions. I
да,
leaned closer.
Да, да.
I found the first thread.
Минералы,
search had begun.
органика,
Every family has a
органика.
son,
Пока
and everyone
нормально.
else is just expected to orbit. Jessica was our son. She had the charm, the expensive highlights, the ability to walk into a room and make investors hand over checks. Patricia and Robert adored her. To them, she was the heir apparent to the Boston real estate dynasty they had built. I was the afterthought,
Так,
the one who wore
главное
glasses,
спать, не лечь
preferred
ничего.
quiet libraries to loud galas, and chose a career tracking deeds and titles instead of closing flashy deals. They called me the
Да,
paper girl.
не вел.
It wasn't an affectionate nickname,
Блин,
was a
реально
dismissal,
чисто на пиво,
but the
что
real
ли?
casualty of this dynamic wasn't me. It was Mia. Mia was 7. She had my brother's eyes.
Так,
When he passed away 3 years ago,
морковки
the family
появились,
structure
знаете.
shifted. Jessica stepped in as the grieving, heroic aunt. She bought Mia expensive dolls. She took her on weekend trips. Patricia and Robert praised her endless generosity. They said she was stepping up to fill the void. I watched from the sidelines. I preferred reading with Mia on Sunday afternoons, answering her questions about how the world worked. Mia was a quiet child, observant and careful. Yesterday, she sat on my living room floor, coloring in a sketchbook. "Aunt Emily," she had asked, not looking up from her blue crayon, "can a college fund just vanish?" I had paused. "No, sweetie, money doesn't vanish. It just moves." "Why do you ask?" Mia shrugged. "Aunt Jessica said my dad didn't leave enough in my special account. She said she has to work extra hard to pay for my school now." A cold knot tightened in my chest. My brother had been meticulous. He had set up an educational trust the week Mia was born. He had funded it fully before his accident. There was no way it was empty. I hadn't said anything to Mia. I just kissed her forehead and told her not to worry about grown-up math. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Now, sitting in my dark office with my own house deposit blocked, that memory clawed its way to the surface. If Jessica was bold enough to freeze my funds using a bypass clause, what had she done with the trust? I opened a new tab on the secure terminal. I bypassed the main holding accounts and queried the specific routing number for Mia's educational fund. The loading bar spun. I waited in the silence. The page refreshed. I stared at the ending balance. 0. The 0 balance wasn't a glitch. I pulled the archive logs for the last 3 years. The money hadn't been lost in a market crash. It hadn't been transferred to a safer bond. It had been systematically drained through 20 different withdrawal requests. Each request was labeled as an educational expense, private tutoring, enrichment camps, things a grieving family wouldn't question. But I was an auditor. I didn't look at the labels. I looked at the authorizing signatures. I pulled up the high-resolution scan of the largest withdrawal form. It was dated a year ago. It transferred $80,000 directly into the primary operating account of Jessica's real estate firm. At the bottom of the page, in blue ink, was my brother's signature. I stared at the screen. I knew his handwriting. The slant of the letters, the sharp angles. It looked authentic, almost too perfect. Something was wrong. I minimized the window and pulled up the death certificate. I kept both documents side by side on my dual monitors. I looked at the date of the transfer. Then I looked at the date on the certificate. The room went dead silent. David leaned over my shoulder. His breathing stopped. "Emily," he whispered. That date. The withdrawal form had been signed on October 17th. My brother had died on October 1st. The signature on the document had been authorized 17 days after he was buried. It wasn't a delayed processing stamp. The metadata on the scan showed the physical document was created, signed, and uploaded on the 17th. Someone had forged a dead man's signature to empty his daughter's future. And the funds had landed squarely in Jessica's business account. The cold knot in my chest turned into something harder, sharper. This was no longer just about family favoritism. This was no longer about a blocked house deposit or a ruined wedding plan. This was wire fraud. This was theft. Jessica hadn't just stolen from me. She had used a ghost to rob a 7-year-old child. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my coffee mug against the wall. I quietly highlighted the discrepancy, saved the metadata logs, and exported the files to my encrypted drive. "David," I said, my voice steady, "can you isolate the IP address that uploaded this file?" He nodded, his fingers already flying across his keyboard. "Give me 10 minutes. I leaned back in my chair. The gala was in 48 hours. They were expecting me to show up defeated. They were expecting the paper girl. They were going to get an auditor. I clicked save. To understand how someone could drain a trust fund without the family noticing. You have to understand, Robert. My father was a man who valued momentum over details. He built his real estate empire on handshakes, golf course meetings,
О,
and the sheer force of his personality.
нифига,
He hired people to
444
handle the paperwork. When Jessica joined the firm, she became his favorite filter. She learned early on that if you handed Robert a stack of papers while he was heading out the door, he would sign the bottom line without flipping a single page.
Так,
I tried to warn him once. I was fresh out of my certification program, working late at the dining table. I noticed a glaring discrepancy in a commercial lease agreement Jessica had drafted. The liability clauses were reversed. It left the family exposed to millions in potential damages. I took the file to his study. I laid it out calmly, pointing to the specific paragraphs. Robert barely glanced at the paper. He looked at me, sighed, and adjusted his tie. "Emily, you worry too much," he had said,
У вас там
his tone
что-то
dripping with patronizing
интересное?
patience.
Тобто,
Jessica negotiated this deal for months. She understands the big
интересный
picture.
проект.
Don't let jealousy make you petty. Jealousy. The word had stung, but the dismissal hurt more. Patricia had walked in, handing him his briefcase, echoing the exact same sentiment. They had normalized Jessica's recklessness. They labeled her manipulation as ambition and my caution as resentment. That was the invisible chain that kept me quiet for years. When the people you trust refuse to see the
Так,
truth,
подожди.
you start to doubt your own eyes. You learn a very specific kind of helplessness. You retreat. You tell yourself it is their company, their risk, their choice. I had stopped bringing them the flaws in the armor. I moved out, started my own firm, and built a life far away from their daily drama. I thought distancing myself was enough. I thought letting them live in their curated illusion was
Уже
the
не
peaceful route.
переучишь, мне кажется.
But peace built on willful ignorance is just a waiting time bomb. Because Jessica hadn't stopped at sloppy commercial leases. The blind trust they gave her had metastasized.
Так,
It gave her the confidence to forge a dead man's name. As David ran the IP trace in the background, I pulled up the primary corporate registry. I needed to see exactly how many blank checks Robert had handed his golden child. If she could steal from Mia, what else had she leveraged? I found a folder marked Family Asset Securitization. I opened it. The screen
дождь,
glowed.
лес,
The
грязь,
server hummed in the
шею.
corner of my office. I had bypassed the
Как ты
primary
любишь.
ledgers and accessed the family's older communication archives. If Jessica was moving money out of an educational trust, a bank notification would have been triggered. The system would have generated an automated alert. Someone had to have seen it.
Себя
I
летят.
filtered the search by the dates matching the forged withdrawal. The query returned a single flagged email. It wasn't sent to Jessica. The bank had routed the alert to the secondary
Так.
account custodian,
Сейчас я
Patricia.
подумаю.
my mother. Patricia lived her life for the Boston social calendar.
Я подумаю.
She managed her reputation the way a
Значение.
general manages a battlefield. Every dinner party, every charity
Иди.
auction, every holiday photo was curated to project flawless success.
Механик.
When I wore the wrong
да?
shoes to a family dinner, she would quietly pull me aside and suggest I change. She hated
Вот так.
anything that looked messy.
Вот так.
I opened the archived email. It was a standard fraud
Металла
prevention
нам
notice.
нужно много.
It highlighted an irregular
Правильно.
pattern of withdrawals from Mia's trust, totaling
Представь,
over
горизонтально
$80,000 in a span of
под
3
одеялом.
weeks. I looked at the timestamp.
Ой, да.
Patricia had opened the email the same day it arrived. She hadn't called
Сейчас,
the bank
кстати,
to freeze the account.
похолодало, сейчас прям
She hadn't
очень
called the
приятно
authorities.
спать.
She hadn't even called me. She had forwarded the notice to Jessica. There was no long, angry message attached. There was no demand for an
Подожди.
explanation. My mother had typed a single
Подожди,
sentence
ты
above
о
the
чём?
forwarded bank alert. Fix this before anyone sees it. I read the words again.
Так, нет,
cursor
этой
blinked at the end of the
штуки
line.
нужно её
Patricia knew.
скрафтить.
She might not have known the exact mechanics of the theft, She might not have known about the forged signature,
Заключение.
but she knew money was missing from her granddaughter's account,
Само, блин,
and her first instinct was to hide the mess. Protect the image. Protect Jessica. I leaned back in my chair. The office suddenly felt very cold. For years, I had assumed my parents were just willfully blind. I thought they were victims of Jessica's charm,
Ладно, пусть
easily
ученый
manipulated by a
быстренько
daughter who knew
мастерскую
exactly what they
это
wanted to hear.
сделает. Очень
This email
быстренько.
changed
Я
the
его
map.
заново в
Patricia wasn't just a
лабораторию.
bystander.
В принципе, уже
She was an active participant in the
делать
cover-up.
как будто бы
She had
нечего.
prioritized the family's shiny facade over the
Красть
financial
прям
security of
дохуя.
a 7-year-old girl who had already lost her father. David set a fresh cup of tea on my desk.
А, у
He
меня
glanced at
две.
the screen.
А,
He didn't
стоп, или
speak.
я могу две
He just
сделать.
placed a hand on my shoulder. I pressed print. The printer whirred to life, spitting out the physical copy of the email.
Всё равно
I picked up the warm sheet of paper and placed it in a new
Органика.
manila folder.
две
I
есть.
reached for a black marker. I wrote Patricia's name on the
Дашь мне
tab.
рожь, пожалуйста.
Jessica
А я
stole the money.
просто уже немножко
Patricia protected the silence. I closed the
тематику
archive.
диалога
The silence had a price.
проебала, потому
I needed to
что,
see where the
блин,
stolen
как
funds
же
went.
много надо
I opened a new search
думать
parameter,
в этой
cross-referencing Jessica's business operating accounts with recent loan
Карлатина. Я так
applications.
еще
If she was
называю.
pulling cash from Mia's trust, she was plugging holes.
Звучит не очень.
The screen filled with PDF attachments.
Спасибо.
Jessica had applied for a mezzanine loan 6 months ago.
А как у
It
тебя
was a
в целом
high-risk
дела,
credit
Ром?
line meant to float a failing
Что-то
commercial
редко
development
тебя
downtown.
вижу.
The
Очень
bank had
много
demanded heavy
работаешь,
collateral.
наверное.
I opened the loan appendices. The legal jargon was dense, designed to fatigue the
случилось?
reader. I didn't skim. I read every line.
Пропал
Page
совсем.
4 listed the primary assets guaranteeing the loan. There was the family's downtown office building. There was a warehouse in the suburbs. And there, buried in a subclause, was a third item. It was categorized under family trust-related assets. I zoomed in on
А,
the text.
я не туда иду.
The document listed a dependent beneficiary
эта
to
хуйня
bolster the
вообще
perceived
нужна.
stability of the guarantor. Mia Hayes, age 7. I stopped breathing. The
Это
air in the room
точно.
felt thin.
Это
Jessica hadn't
точно
just drained the girl's
получше.
educational fund. She had taken Mia's name, her social security number, and her status as a dependent, and woven them into a corporate liability structure. She wasn't forcing Mia to pay the debt directly.
Блин, а
It
вот
was a maneuver to make the balance sheet look healthier
Стоп.
to a risk assessor.
чё-
But the moral line she had crossed was invisible and absolute. If the loan defaulted, Mia's remaining
понимаю.
familial assets, anything left in her name, could be subjected to legal scrutiny.
Чё там так?
Jessica had taken an orphaned child and turned her into a financial human shield. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I thought about Mia sitting on my floor,
Ай.
coloring with her blue crayon.
Эр.
I thought about my brother, who had
Да.
trusted his family to protect his only daughter. This was the business Jessica
Уже
ran.
просто забыла,
This
как
was the
это.
empire Patricia and
по-моему,
Robert were
сверху
celebrating at a
где-то
gala in
была.
48 hours. I printed the mezzanine loan appendix. I highlighted Mia's name in bright yellow marker. I placed the document into a second folder. I didn't feel sadness anymore. The betrayal had burned away, leaving behind a cold, sharp focus. Jessica treated people like line items on a spreadsheet.
Да
They
не,
were assets to be leveraged or liabilities to be erased. She had categorized me as a liability.
Что-то как-то
She had categorized Mia as an
очень
asset.
быстро надоело.
I picked up my phone. I had a missed call from Jessica. A voicemail notification popped up on the screen. She wanted to meet for coffee tomorrow.
Опять что ли подниматься?
She said she had a solution for my blocked house deposit. I knew it was a trap.
Да.
I also knew I was going to walk right into it. I hit delete on the voicemail. She used a child.
Как?
The coffee shop was located in the financial district, 2 blocks from Jessica's office. It was loud,
Опять
crowded with suits
подниматься?
and espresso machines. Jessica sat at a corner table. She wore a
Больше
tailored
нет
blazer and a
новостей.
smile that didn't reach her eyes. I sat
Ну,
down across from her.
слушай, это
I
уже
didn't order
хорошо.
anything. Emily, she
Ты не
said,
залетел,
her
это
voice dripping with
прекрасно.
practiced sympathy. I am so sorry about the escrow mix-up. The bank's automated systems are a nightmare lately. They flagged the transfer because of the gala
Наверху
expenses.
какая-то штука.
You used the bypass clause, I said. My voice was level. Jessica waved a hand, dismissing the detail. A technicality. Dad asked me to consolidate the accounts for the anniversary audit. Your deposit just got caught in the sweep. She reached into her leather tote bag. But I talked to Mom and Dad. We want to help you.
Неужели
She slid a
опять
cream-colored
наверх
envelope across the table. I didn't touch it. What is that? I asked. It's a family settlement agreement, Jessica said. She leaned forward, lowering her voice.
Я ж не
If you
проверяла,
sign
мне не
it, I can authorize
предъявляли.
the release of your $150,000
Думала бы
today.
сразу
You won't lose
предъявили,
your
если
house.
что.
I pulled the document from the envelope. It was 5 pages long, standard boilerplate language at the top.
Если вдруг
I flipped past the pleasantries. I didn't care about the release
смотреть
of
будет.
funds.
Ну,
I cared about what I
от
was giving up
куста
to get them.
ничего не
I found
идет.
it on page 3,
В том-то и
Section 4.
прикол.
Clause B. The undersigned agrees to waive any and all rights to
Наверх от
access
него ничего не
audit,
идет.
or contest any financial transactions related to the family holding company or its subsidiaries for a retrospective period of 5 years. She wasn't giving me my
Ладно,
money
я
back.
еще раз
She was buying my
поднимусь.
silence.
Но
She
если
knew I had the skills
подниматься
to
не
find the
надо,
missing
я
trust
буду
funds.
ругаться.
She knew I could trace the forged signatures. This document was a firewall. If I signed it, I would be legally barred from exposing her
Знаешь,
Ponzi
просто
scheme.
так батарейку
I looked up from the
потрачу.
paper. Jessica was watching me, her eyes tracking my reaction. She expected me to fold. She expected the paper girl to take the cash and run. It's a standard non-disclosure. Jessica lied smoothly. Just to keep family business private. You know how Dad hates drama. I slowly folded the document and slid it back into the envelope. I picked it up. I'll need my lawyer to review this, I said. Jessica's smile tightened. Emily, the house seller needs the wire today. Don't make this complicated. I'm an auditor,
Фильмики
Jessica,
17 не знаю
I replied,
такого.
standing up. Complicated is what I do.
Не слышала даже.
I didn't wait for her response. I walked out into the cold Seattle air, the envelope gripped tightly in my hand. I kept the paper. My phone started vibrating before I even reached my car. The screen flashed with incoming emails from the family
Туда
group thread.
придётся идти.
The subject line was in all caps, security breach. I sat in the driver's seat and opened the message. It was from Jessica. She had sent it to Robert, Patricia, our extended relatives, and key board members. I regret to inform everyone that our firm's internal servers were accessed unlawfully last night. Sensitive client data and family financial records were compromised. Given Emily's technical background and her recent anger over a banking error, our IT consultant believes her credentials were used. We are managing the fallout. My phone buzzed again. A text from Patricia. How could you do this? Right before the gala. Jessica was
Короче, мы
escalating.
получили эту
I hadn't
штуку
signed the
всё-таки
NDA, so she was
уже,
burning my
или мне
credibility.
еще какая-то...
If I tried to present evidence of her theft at the
мне вот
gala,
это нужно.
she had already planted the narrative that I was a disgruntled hacking thief who manipulated documents out of spite. I drove back to my office. David was already there, looking at a second monitor. I dropped my keys on the
Не
desk.
обходится.
She sent a blast. I said,
Так, редкий
She's claiming I hacked the family servers. David didn't look away from the screen.
Супер.
I saw the email. She's claiming the breach happened last night.
Исследование.
Can she fake that? I asked.
Во-первых, назначение.
Anyone can write an email claiming a breach, David said,
лаборатория.
his fingers moving across his keyboard. But server logs are hard-coded.
Исследование.
They track every login, every IP address,
Волчиный
and every
скафандр.
keystroke.
Это нам
You gave up your
нужно?
administrative
А что нам
credentials
еще
to the family
нужно?
firm 8 months
Больше,
ago.
лучше.
She said my
Лучше
credentials were
возле
used.
металла.
David brought up a black command window. Lines of
Блин,
code
а
scrolled
что нам
rapidly.
важнее?
If she used your old login, The system still records the physical location of the machine that accessed the network. He typed a final command and hit enter. A single line of data highlighted in green on the screen. Login E_Hayes_admin. Timestamp 2:13 a.m. IP address 192.168.1.45. That IP address resolves to a residential ISP, David said quietly. In Beacon Hill, Jessica's neighborhood. She logged in from her own home, I said. At 2 in the morning, she used my old username to download the files so it would look like I stole them. David printed the access log. He handed me the sheet. She just handed you the proof of her own sabotage. I looked at the printed numbers. Jessica thought she was playing chess, but she was leaving muddy footprints all over a digital floor. She expected the family to believe her words over my silence. She didn't understand data. I placed the printed log in a third manila folder. I picked up my marker and wrote, "The hack," on the tab. The numbers told the truth. I stood in front of the large whiteboard in my office. The room smelled of dry erase markers and cold tea. I had 3 manila folders on the desk, but I needed to see the architecture of the crime. I needed to see the system. I drew a circle in the center of the board. I wrote Jessica's firm. I drew a line pointing inward. My $150,000 deposit. I drew another line pointing inward. Mia's educational trust. I stepped back. Why did a successful real estate firm need to steal a house deposit and a child's college fund? The answer was always debt. I picked up the marker and drew a large red box above the circle. Downtown commercial project. I had seen the ledgers. The project was bleeding cash. Contractors hadn't been paid. Permits were stalled. I drew an arrow from the circle to the red box. The stolen funds were plugging the leaks, but it wasn't enough. 80,000 from Mia and 150,000 from me couldn't save a failing commercial high-rise. Jessica needed millions. I looked down at the mezzanine loan appendix I had printed earlier, the one that used Mia as a dependent beneficiary. I drew a new circle on the right side of the board. Mezzanine credit line. I drew an arrow from the credit line into Jessica's firm. Then, I drew an arrow from Jessica's firm back to the old debts. I stared at the lines. It was a classic structure. You take money from a new source to pay the old source. You keep the illusion of solvency alive just long enough to secure the next loan. Jessica wasn't building an empire. She was running a Ponzi scheme. And then,
Стример,
the final
ну
piece
ты
clicked into
говноед.
place. The 30-year anniversary
Такие
gala.
смайлики.
Why
И
throw a lavish,
сердечко.
expensive party in the middle of a cash crisis? You don't throw a gala to celebrate the past when you are drowning in the present. You throw a gala to
Без
attract new money.
негатива
I opened the
вообще.
guest list Jessica had circulated to the family last week. I scanned the names, past the relatives, past the minor vendors. I found it. Marcus Vance.
Чё у нас в оранжере?
partner,
У нас прям
Vanguard Capital.
много.
Vanguard Capital was one of the
Морковок
largest
мы
private
можем
equity lenders on the East
позвать
Coast.
этого.
Jessica wasn't hosting a family dinner.
А
She was hosting
на
a pitch
кухню
meeting.
его
She was
этого
going to use the
ботаника
glossy facade of our
отправить.
family's legacy to secure a massive injection of capital from Vanguard. If she got that money,
За 5
the
дней
Ponzi
у меня
scheme
есть
would keep
надежда
spinning.
поднять
more
настроение.
assets would be leveraged.
В
More
целом.
futures would be drained. I capped the red marker.
Ещё немножко
The gala wasn't just a stage
металла.
for my humiliation. It was the
Чтоб
crime
на
scene.
металле он
I had
быстрее
48
будет
hours to burn it
добывать,
down.
чем я.
The gala was a trap. The screen of my phone lit up on the desk.
Почему ты
It was a
негатив не
forwarded email from
говоришь
Eleanor,
мне?
David's mother.
Да
The sender was an
блин,
anonymous address,
теперь
but the syntax
буду.
was unmistakable.
Ну,
The message
потому
was
что,
3
слушай,
paragraphs
потому что
long.
есть английское
It
слово
detailed my recent
negative.
financial instability.
Соответственно,
It mentioned the loss of my house
иностранцы,
deposit as a
которые
sign of
будут
poor
думать,
management.
забанить
It
меня
heavily
или
implied
нет,
that I was a liability,
они поймут.
a fractured branch of a successful family tree. and
Себе,
suggested that
себе или
David's family
себе?
protect their assets before the wedding. Jessica was thorough. If she couldn't control
Себе.
me with a non-disclosure agreement, she would try to isolate me. She wanted to make
Что?
me toxic to the only people who stood in my corner. I read the email twice. The grammar choices, the specific formatting of the bullet points. The passive-aggressive tone matched Jessica's corporate memos perfectly. She hadn't even bothered to disguise her writing style.
Так,
David walked into the room carrying a stack of printed server
сколько
logs.
мне еще
He
нужно?
saw the screen. He stopped. My mother forwarded it to me 5 minutes ago.
Так.
He said. I'm sorry, I said.
Ага,
I didn't want your family
минералов
dragged into this.
хватает, металлов
David's
не
family built
хватает.
logistical software for supply chains. They were quiet,
Многозадачный
pragmatic
Смаш.
people who lived in
Я
Seattle and avoided high
посмотрела,
society
вот
drama.
садись на мое место.
They measured
Я
people by their
посмотрела,
actions,
какой бы ты
not their
здесь
zip
был
codes.
многозадачный.
Don't apologize, David said. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. He put it on speaker. Eleanor answered on the second ring. David. Emily.
Или мне самой сесть
Eleanor,
на металл?
I said, keeping my voice steady. I saw the
Там
email.
на смене.
A
Ладно,
coward
он
sends an email from a fake
отработает.
address, Eleanor said. Her voice
Я
was crisp.
сама.
A desperate
Вообще есть
coward sends it
концовка,
2 days
есть,
before
но
a
это
public event.
второй акт.
I can explain the
И
situation with
тут
the deposit.
довольно-таки
I
всё
started.
очень долго,
You don't
на
need to
самом
explain
деле.
anything. Eleanor
Да
interrupted
мне
gently.
видно будет.
We run a business.
Есть
Emily,
момент, когда
we know
тебе
what a smear
видно,
campaign
ты
looks like.
ещё
Someone is
больше
trying to make you look
тупишь.
small. There was a pause
Со
on the line.
стороны реально
I looked at David.
многие моменты,
offered a
где
small,
намного проще
reassuring nod.
пересматривать стримы, такая,
Your
бля,
father
как
and
я
I
не
just booked our
заметила
flights.
эту штуку.
Eleanor continued.
Боже, один
We
глаз
land at 4
сюда,
o'clock tomorrow
потом второй
afternoon.
туда.
We have our hotel. And David sent us the tickets for the anniversary gala. My breath caught. You're
Так,
coming to the gala. We wouldn't miss it, Eleanor said. We want to meet the woman who wrote this email.
чё
We want
нас
to look her in the eye.
в производстве
The call ended.
мастерской?
I put the phone down. Jessica had tried to sever my safety net. Instead, she had mobilized it. She expected David's family to act like Patricia and Robert. She expected them to panic over reputation and cut ties to avoid a scandal.
Ага.
She didn't realize that loyalty doesn't flinch at a
Так, мне
badly
нужно
written anonymous
каждого
email.
просканить
I looked back at the whiteboard.
обязательно.
The Ponzi scheme,
Обязательно.
the stolen trust, the fake hack, and now, the
Такой
personal
на
smear campaign.
косоглазе, да,
The pieces were all on the
потихонечку
board.
уже
I didn't have to
появляется.
fight alone. The office was quiet. I spent the next 3 hours organizing the printed
Ладно,
documents.
пойду-ка я.
I had the bank
Ох,
notices,
егау,
the forged
ну
withdrawal
вот.
form, the server
Дочка,
access
ох,
logs,
егау.
and the mezzanine loan appendix. I needed everything cross-referenced. I reached for a thick stack of old property deeds from the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. As I pulled the files upward, a
Ладно,
loose piece of
похуй,
paper
пойду
slipped from
сама
the
на
stack
металл.
and fluttered to the floor.
Наверное.
It wasn't a
Я
bank
не могу
statement.
ждать
It was a piece of
долго.
construction paper.
Металл
I knelt and
ебучий.
picked it up. It was a drawing Mia had
Ебучий.
made for me a few months ago. She used a bright blue crayon to draw a crude, square building with a triangle roof.
Так,
2
шахтёры
stick figures
тогда
stood in front of it. One was
на
tall,
обед
the other was
посажу.
small, above the house, in shaky,
Или кто?
uneven
Кто обед
letters.
делает?
Mia had written,
Ботаник
for when I go to
делает обед.
college. I stared at the blue letters. My brother had talked about
Мне
college
как будто
constantly
вообще
before his
ничего не
accident.
требуется
He had
сейчас.
promised Mia she could go anywhere she
Просто
wanted.
ждать, пока
He
металл
built that trust
появится.
fund to guarantee that promise. He bought her
Либо
future with his
искать
hard work,
новые
and Jessica had liquidated it to pay for a failing commercial real estate venture.
металла.
I traced the edge of the crayon drawing with my thumb. Up until this moment, a small part of me had hesitated. Patricia was still my
С
mother.
бензом проблема,
Robert was still
с
my father.
металлом, да.
Exposing
Кстати,
Jessica meant
что там с
destroying the 30-year
бензом?
legacy they had built. It meant
Вот,
public
тут есть
humiliation.
неглубокое
It meant burning the
месторождение
family tree
металла,
down to the
можно,
roots.
в принципе,
I had spent my life trying not to be a burden. I had
как-то
accepted the role of the
попробовать
paper
туда
girl.
сбегать.
I had watched Jessica take the credit, take the money, and take the spotlight. I was ready to walk away and just build my own life in Seattle with David. But walking away meant leaving Mia behind. It meant letting Jessica use a 7-year-old as collateral. It meant the ghost of my brother would watch his daughter pay for his sister's greed.
Я видела
I placed the
очереди
drawing on the
рядом с
center of my desk.
заправками.
The hesitation evaporated. I didn't care about the 30-year anniversary. I didn't care about the Boston social calendar. I didn't care about the whisper networks or the polite smiles at the country club. A child had been robbed. The adults in the room had chosen to look the other way.
Так,
They chose the
чуть-чуть
comfort of a lie
добили.
over the safety of a little girl.
Только чуть-чуть.
I opened my laptop. I pulled up the
Вот это
presentation
было
software.
ещё- Опа.
I wasn't just compiling a defense for my stolen house deposit. I was building a prosecution. I started with a blank white slide.
Ассоциация.
I typed a single heading in bold, black text. Asset audit the Mia Hayes Trust.
Стоп,
I looked at the blue
что?
crayon house. I was going to get her future back.
Не-
Building an audit
нет
trail
места.
requires a specific
Подождите,
type of
нет
discipline.
места, это
You
значит,
cannot present raw data
у
to
меня
a
в
crowd and
складе
expect them to
нет
understand the
места.
crime. You have to draw the map. I
Блядь.
sat at the desk as the sun set over Seattle. The glow of the monitor
Блядь.
illuminated the room.
А чё
I
вы,
didn't use
блядь?
legal jargon for the presentation slides. I used simple, undeniable facts. Slide 1 was the baseline. It
Так,
showed the original
минералов
balance of
как бы
Mia's trust fund
достаточно.
on the day my brother died.
Либо
Slide 2 showed the
произвести
withdrawal
уже
request.
что-нибудь.
I cropped the image to focus on the date of the signature, placing it directly next to the date on his death
Пишет
certificate.
так, назначение.
The contrast was stark. It required no explanation. Next, I mapped the money.
Оранжереи вроде никого
I
нет.
used green arrows to show funds moving out of the trust, and red arrows to show them landing in Jessica's operating account.
Органики не
I
так
highlighted the
уж
dates.
много. А
The
чё?
timeline was airtight.
Спецресурсов
Then came the
очень
mezzanine
много,
loan.
наверное.
I scanned the appendix and used a digital yellow highlighter to box Mia's name listed under the dependent beneficiary assets. I added a side-by-side comparison of the IP address from the server logs and Jessica's home address.
Надо
Fact.
думать.
Fact. Fact. There was no room for Jessica to spin a narrative. There was no space for Patricia to ask for a quiet resolution.
Либо строить.
David brought in takeout containers
Да,
from the Thai
строить,
place down the
наверное,
street.
надо.
We ate at the desk, reviewing the
Надо
slides.
строить.
It's a locked door, David said, pointing at the screen.
Так.
Every time she tries to claim a misunderstanding, the next slide shuts it down. That's the point.
Снизили с евро
said.
5 на евро 2.
She relies on people
Да,
getting
я
confused by the
слышала то,
paperwork.
что, кажется,
She talks
бензин
fast and
ещё
uses corporate buzzwords. If the data is
портилось.
visual,
Главное,
she
чтобы
can't talk her way out of it.
машины от этого не ломались.
I finished the presentation and ran a final review. 20 slides. A 10-minute timeline of systemic fraud. I exported the file. I didn't upload it to a cloud server where it could be intercepted or flagged by the firm's IT
Они
monitors.
жалуются на
I took a silver USB
всё, что
drive from my drawer.
происходит, но
I plugged it in and watched the progress bar fill as the file transferred.
говорят, что
I
лучше
ejected the drive.
жаловаться, но
The metal
в
felt
своей
cold against my
квартире,
palm.
так сказать.
I opened my purse. It was a simple black clutch I had bought for the gala. I slipped the USB drive into the hidden zippered pocket inside. I placed my car keys and a tube of lipstick next to it. Tomorrow morning, David and I were flying to Boston. We were going to put on formal wear. We were going to walk into a ballroom filled with the city's wealthiest investors, contractors, and socialites. I zipped the clutch closed. The paperwork was finished. The trap was set. The Boston mansion was a monument to old money and carefully maintained appearances.
Давайте.
Valets parked German luxury cars in the circular driveway. Waiters carried silver trays of champagne through the heavy oak
Так,
doors.
ща
The
будем
30-year
строить.
anniversary gala for Hayes Real
Давайте
Estate was
строить.
designed to look like a coronation. David and I walked through the entrance. I wore a simple
Здесь
black
далеко.
silk dress. David wore a charcoal
Блин,
suit.
щас
His parents, Eleanor and Arthur, walked beside
вообще
us. They looked
отстой.
calm, observant, taking in the spectacle with the
Я
quiet
вообще
detachment of
ожидала,
people who
что будет
recognized the performance.
огромные очереди,
The ballroom
знаешь,
hummed
там
with the sound of
на
a string quartet and the
автобусы и
low
так далее.
murmur
Даже
of
маман
networking.
спрашивала, у них
Robert and
же
Patricia stood near the
бензин
stage.
теперь только
They
для
waved from a distance,
госслужащих.
projecting the image of a
Вот.
happy family for the
И
cameras.
маман
But they didn't walk over to
говорит,
greet
что
us.
у них
It didn't
просто
take long
сейчас
for the golden child
настолько
to find us.
много
Jessica
обычного
glided across the marble
транспорта
floor.
вот этого,
She wore a custom emerald green gown that cost more than a reliable used car.
таких
Her
очередей
smile
прям
was
нет.
blinding, ready for the photographers hired to document the evening.
Так.
Emily, she said, projecting her voice just loud enough for the nearest investors to hear.
Да.
You made it. I wasn't sure you'd be in the mood for a party. She looked at David,
Этот раз
then at
им
his parents,
паспорт будет.
offering a practiced, sympathetic nod. We are all just so heartbroken about the escrow issue. The market is so
Так.
volatile. Losing a house deposit
Как
is a
будто
hard lesson
можно
to
еще
learn.
один малый
She was
склад
playing the benevolent
построить.
sister. She was framing my financial
Хоть
crisis as a personal failure right in front of my future in-laws.
сюда.
Eleanor didn't blink. She
Хоть
took a sip of her
так.
sparkling water. Lessons are rarely
Вот.
hard, Jessica. They are usually just illuminating. Jessica's
Да.
smile faltered for a fraction of a second,
Нормально.
but she recovered quickly. She turned her focus
Нормально.
back to me.
Нормально?
Well,
Нормально.
Grab a drink, Jessica said, patting my arm. Dad is giving his speech in 20
Так,
minutes.
он не на
Try to look happy for
смене?
him.
Почему не
Tonight
на
is about the
смене?
family's legacy. She
Уже
turned and walked
поздно.
away, mingling seamlessly back into the
Так,
crowd of wealthy
тогда
contractors and bankers. She was untouchable in her
очень
element.
быстро щас
She thought she held all the cards. She thought my silence
тему
was
не
guaranteed
отвечаю.
because I
Ну,
was too
а чё
embarrassed to
тема
fight
ли
back.
отвечаю?
If you have ever had to smile at a family gathering while
Хихи-пихи.
holding the exact evidence that could destroy the
Чё
person
тема
mocking
ли
you,
отвечаю, если
let
это
me
не
know in the
связано прям
comments.
с какой-то
I watched her laugh at a joke made by a city councilman. I didn't
с
feel
каким-то
anger.
лютым негативом,
I felt the weight of the
наверное.
silver USB drive resting in my black clutch. She wanted to talk about the family
Ты
legacy.
не понял, последний
I was
час
going
за
to give her
трэш с
exactly what she
унитазом?
asked for. I looked up at the ceiling. Three massive crystal chandeliers hung from the ornate plaster medallions,
Тогда не
casting warm light
захочется
over the
такое
dancing crowd.
повторять еще раз.
The floral arrangements on each table featured imported white orchids.
Тут и каждые
Waiters served
выходные.
caviar on toast points. It was a beautiful room. It was also a crime scene. While David spoke quietly with his father near the bar, I took a slow walk around the perimeter of the ballroom. I ran my fingers along the edge of a mahogany side table. During my audit 2 nights ago, I hadn't just looked at Mia's trust and the mezzanine loans. I had pulled the municipal property records for this exact address, the Hayes family mansion, the crown jewel of their portfolio. I found a document filed with the county clerk just 14 days ago. It was a notice of default. Jessica had leveraged the equity in this house to secure another short-term bridge loan. She had missed 3 consecutive payments. The bank had initiated the pre-foreclosure process. The very roof over our heads was 60 days away from being seized. I watched Robert stand near the stage, shaking hands with a state senator. He looked proud, his chest puffed out, accepting congratulations for 3 decades of business excellence. He had no idea. He had signed the papers Jessica put in front of him, trusting his golden child to manage the details. He was hosting a victory lap in a house he technically no longer controlled, and Patricia stood beside him, adjusting his lapel. She knew about the missing money from Mia's account, but she had chosen to bury it. Did she know about the house? Did she know her curated social standing was built on a foundation of unpaid debts and forged signatures? A waiter offered me a champagne flute. I shook my head. This gala was a frantic, expensive illusion. Jessica was using the party to secure a new round of funding from Vanguard Capital. The senior partner of Vanguard was sitting at table 1, sipping a martini, watching the spectacle. If Jessica closed that deal tonight, She would use the new money to pay off the default notice on the
Соло
house.
пьют только
The cycle
алкоголики,
would continue.
говорят.
The Ponzi scheme would
Это ж
survive
так
another
было
quarter.
на самом-то деле.
I looked at my watch. 8:30. The speeches were scheduled for 8:45.
У
I walked
меня
back to
жизнь
David.
слишком
He handed me a
скучная.
glass
Ну,
of club soda.
видимо, да,
They're setting up the projector on the main stage,
походу.
David said quietly, for the corporate retrospective. Is the input cable accessible? I asked. David nodded. Standard HDMI, taped to the podium. I looked at the crystal chandeliers one last time. The lights were bright, but the structure was rotting from the inside out. The family legacy was a house of cards, and the tide was finally coming in. I opened my clutch. The velvet-lined walls of the ballroom muffled the sound of the string quartet.
Не знаю.
I stood near
Мне
the heavy brass
кажется,
doors, watching the
очень
crowd.
важна компания.
I opened my black
типа
clutch to
для
check the silver
для
USB drive
раскрытия
one last time.
алкоголя.
My fingers brushed
Если
against
ты
a
пьешь
thick
в
piece
не
of
особо
stationery
приятной
folded at the bottom of the
компании, ты будешь
purse.
злой.
It was the envelope
Если
my
ты
grandmother,
пьешь
Eleanor,
в крутой
had given me
компании,
3
ты
years
будешь,
ago.
наоборот, такой,
Eleanor built the foundation of this
«Будьте вы
company
мои
alongside my
дорогие, всех вас
grandfather.
очень
She was a woman of sharp
люблю,
edges and zero illusions.
Вот
She
так
never
вот.
bought into Jessica's golden child
Поэтому,
routine.
если ты
While
пьешь
Robert
с
and Patricia clapped for
незнакомцами,
Jessica's
это
flashy
как будто бы
presentations,
твоя нервная
Eleanor used to sit in
система
the back of the
очень
room,
уязвима.
her eyes narrowing at the
К
numbers.
каждому
She handed me this
слову,
envelope in her hospital room 2 days before she
каждому
died.
взгляду.
The room smelled of
То
bleach and
что если
wilting
ты
lilies.
почувствуешь себя
Her grip
как
on my
будто
wrist
бы
had
не
been
с той
surprisingly strong.
не с той
Your sister builds
компании,
houses on
у
sand,
тебя будет прям
Eleanor
такое
had whispered,
опустошение.
her breathing ragged.
Не знаю,
And your
может,
father
только
hands her
у
the
меня
shovels.
так, конечно.
When the tide comes in, do not let them drown your brother's girl.
Так.
She pressed the sealed envelope into my palm. If the records ever stop matching the stories, follow the seal. I had kept the envelope locked in a safe for years. I didn't open it until 2 nights ago, sitting in my office after discovering the forged signature on Mia's educational fund. I had broken the old wax seal. Inside, there was no emotional letter. There was no grand confession. There was only a single sheet of heavy bond paper bearing the letterhead of an independent wealth management firm in Chicago, a firm Jessica and Robert had never used. Below the letterhead was a sequence of routing numbers and an access code.
Блин, я
My
вот
grandmother
просто
had known.
представила себя,
She had seen the
если бы
greed
я в
taking root in
соло
Jessica.
пошла в
She knew my
бар
brother's
пить.
standard educational savings account
Там бы
wouldn't be
начала,
safe from a bypass clause or a forged document if Jessica ever got
это вот
desperate.
всё.
So, Eleanor had built a fortress.
Если бы я
She
очень
had taken the
сильно
bulk of my brother's
набухалась.
life
Ну,
insurance
как будто
payout, the real money meant
девчонкам
for Mia's
нужно
future,
пить
and moved
именно
it
с
out of the
теми,
family's
в
reach.
ком мы
Jessica thought she
уверены.
had drained the well. She had only emptied the bird bath. I ran my thumb over the crisp edge of the envelope. Eleanor had trusted me to read the fine print. She had designated me as the sole auditor of the hidden account. I looked across the ballroom. Jessica was laughing, holding a glass of champagne,
Так,
leaning in to whisper something to a
девочкам
state
соло
senator.
опасно. Ну
She
да,
thought she was the
да,
smartest person
девочкам
in the
всё,
room.
сука, соло
She thought she had
опасно.
outmaneuvered a dead man and a
У меня
7-year-old
знакомая
girl.
говорит, что
She
она в
forgot about the
Турцию
woman who taught her how
поехала
to count.
просто
Understanding
по
the weapon
приколу
Eleanor left
одна.
behind requires a basic lesson in
Ну
financial
как?
architecture.
Как ты
When my
это
brother
делаешь?
died, his standard accounts were transferred to Robert as the legal executor.
Она
Robert,
такая еще ростом,
acting on
где-то
blind faith,
150
signed a broad
чем-то.
power of attorney, granting Jessica administrative control over the firm's holding accounts. That piece of paper was Jessica's master key. It allowed her to authorize withdrawals, leverage assets, and redirect funds. It allowed her to forge a dead man's signature on a standard educational fund and sweep $80,000 into her failing commercial project.
Нет,
But the routing numbers
нельзя.
inside
Я
Eleanor's
сам
envelope
хочу.
did
Я
not
такая,
lead to a standard account.
ясно, ей
They
не
led to an
нравлюсь
irrevocable trust.
ничего.
In the world of wealth management,
И в
a standard
расстроенных
trust is a
чувствах
wooden door.
уйдет.
You can change the locks. You can break a window. An irrevocable
только
trust is a
красть,
titanium vault
знаешь,
buried
ты
underground. Once an asset
такой
is placed
смайлик
inside an
поставил,
irrevocable
типа,
trust,
Маш, ты
it
себя
legally
вообще
ceases to belong to the
видела?
grantor.
Типа, такой
It cannot be
только
modified,
красть, блин.
amended, or terminated without the explicit permission of the
Ты
named
хочешь сказать,
beneficiary.
если подруга
The
упивает
beneficiary
с
was
кем-то,
Mia.
она ему
Mia
доверяет.
was 7 years old. Therefore,
Ну,
the trust was
либо
locked in amber until her
напивается
18th
не до
birthday.
таких прям
Jessica's power of attorney
кондиций.
meant nothing here. Robert's status as the family
Не
patriarch meant
душни.
nothing. The Chicago firm
Говорил
acted as an
бы.
independent trustee. And Eleanor had written a very specific stipulation into the
Так.
charter the trust could only be accessed or audited by a certified external examiner. She had named me. During my audit, I used the access code to verify the vault.
Все, что
The
нам
real
сейчас
money, over $2 million,
требуется,
was sitting
это
untouched,
просто еще
generating quiet interest, miles away from Jessica's Ponzi
пошахтюрить.
scheme. Jessica's greed had created a massive blind spot. She found the $80,000 in the surface account and stopped looking. She assumed that was all my brother had left. She assumed she had stolen Mia's entire future. She didn't realize her theft had triggered a silent alarm.
Ек.
By draining the surface account, she gave me the exact audit trail I needed to expose her methods without ever jeopardizing Mia's actual inheritance. I didn't have to fight to get the stolen $80,000 back. I just had to show the room exactly how she took it.
Еще чуть-чуть
I watched a
осталось.
waiter clear empty
Вот,
plates
и
from the head
можете
table.
работать.
The mechanics of justice are rarely dramatic. They don't involve shouting matches or broken glass. Real justice is quiet.
Производство,
It is a
пожалуйста,
paper
пожалуйста.
trail. It is a sequence of dates that do not align. It is an
Теперь у
independent
нас
trustee
нихуя
rejecting
не
a fraudulent
будет.
signature.
Назначение
sip of water.
мастерская.
The vault was secure. Now,
Механик.
it was time to level the building.
What is
The
your
string quartet
gender?
finished
I'm
their set.
mechanic.
A low chime sounded through the ballroom speakers,
Всё.
signaling the guests to take their seats for the evening's speeches. I turned away from the
Я
brass
просто
doors
хочу
and started
сделать
toward
эту
the front of the
штуку,
room.
немножко продвинуться
I
по
felt a hand wrapped tightly
сюжету.
around my forearm. I stopped. Patricia stood in the shadowed alcove near the hallway leading to the restrooms. Her grip was urgent. Her eyes darted toward the crowded
И
table,
чё ещё?
ensuring no one was watching us. Emily,
Рабиди
she
нужно
whispered.
начать
Her voice
добывать.
was thin,
Хотя...
stripped of its usual social polish. Mom,
Хотя нет.
I said.
Хотя да.
I didn't pull my
хотя
arm
нет.
away. I just looked at her hand until she slowly let go.
Нужно еще
I know
оформить
you're
эту
upset about the house
хуйню,
deposit,
этот
Patricia
гравитационный
said,
центр,
her words rushing together.
и
Jessica
сделать так,
told me there
чтобы
was a
никто
banking
не
error.
сдох. Что,
She said you two had a
как
disagreement
сделать,
at the
чтобы
coffee
никто не
shop.
сдох, нужно сделать
She
всем
tried to make me
МРТ,
sign a non-disclosure
а
agreement to
потом
get my own
после
money
этого
back.
поднять всем
I
настроение,
corrected
когда
smoothly.
будет
Patricia
вечер.
swallowed hard.
МРТ
She reached out and adjusted the collar of my
делается.
dress, a maternal gesture that felt hollow. Your sister is under a lot of
Расследование
pressure right now.
завершено.
The commercial project downtown is causing her stress.
Хорошо.
People make
Я
mistakes
тоже
when they are
скоро буду
stressed.
заканчивать.
She
в
was
этом
doing it
плане.
again. She was softening the edges
Ну,
of
в
Jessica's
плане
malice.
этот самый...
A mistake is losing a file,
Игру.
I said. Forging a signature to
Всё,
steal
лёг,
from an
могу
orphaned
уснуть.
child is a choice. Patricia flinched.
Ой,
The color drained
отчёт.
from her face. She knew. She had always known. The email alert from the bank was the proof,
Похуёвила,
but seeing her
ты
physical
больше,
reaction cemented
я не
it.
знаю,
Please,
ты пьёшь какую-нибудь
Patricia pleaded,
минералочку?
Robert's heart can't take a scandal. This is our 30-year
Ты
anniversary.
ложись на бок.
All of our partners are here. Marcus Vance from Vanguard is sitting at table 1. If you make a scene tonight, you won't just hurt Jessica. You will destroy the family. She looked at me with wide, desperate eyes. She was asking me to bleed quietly so they could keep wearing their expensive clothes. She wanted me to absorb the damage.
Куда
Don't do this
сама?
tonight. She begged.
Роскомнадзора
We can
или
fix it
чё?
tomorrow. As a family. I looked past
Просто
her
к голове не
toward the bright
прикладывай.
lights of the ballroom. I saw Mia sitting at a side table, drawing on a napkin.
Роман.
When Jessica took Mia's future, I asked,
А
my voice
потом он
barely
мне
above a
будет
whisper.
говорить не
Was that also
душни.
family? Patricia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She had no script for the truth. I stepped around her and walked into the light.
Чем
If you
курить,
agree
потом
that keeping the
плохо.
peace should never mean protecting a predator, drop a
Такая вот
100 below.
потребность
Robert stood behind the
у
lucite
человека.
podium. He adjusted the microphone. A wide, charismatic smile anchored on his face. The room fell silent, offering him the respect his 30-year tenure commanded. 3 decades, Robert boomed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. We built this firm on trust. We built it on a handshake. We built it on the belief that a family stands together through every market shift and every storm. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. I stood near the edge of the stage. I looked at table 1, Marcus Vance, the senior partner at Vanguard Capital, leaned back in his chair, swirling the olive in his glass.
Так,
His checkbook was
исследование
the
нужно
only thing keeping
новое.
Jessica's Ponzi scheme alive. Robert raised his glass toward the head
Быстрая
table,
сборка,
and
как
no
раз
one
можете
embodies that
быстро
spirit more than
производить
Jessica.
буровые
She has steered our newest
заряды,
commercial developments with
аккумуляторы,
unmatched
скафандры,
vision.
защитные
The
заряды
applause
с
grew louder.
пределами базы.
Jessica stood up, pressing a
Кстати,
hand to her
удобная
chest,
штука.
her emerald gown catching the
Защита
chandelier
от
light. She looked
аномалий.
magnificent. She looked victorious. Now,
Только
Robert
одну
continued,
встречу с
gesturing toward
аномалией,
me.
ладно, похуй.
I'd like to invite my youngest daughter,
Дальность
Emily,
иллюминатора в
to say a
целом
few words about our
похуй.
history. He stepped back, clapping his
А,
hands. He expected a short, boring toast.
Тогда
He expected the paper
быструю
girl to mumble a
сборку
few pleasantries,
сделаем.
raise her glass, and fade back into the shadows. I walked up the 3 carpeted steps. My heels made no sound. I reached the podium. I didn't adjust the
Что
microphone.
позволяет
placed my black
быстрее
clutch on the
устранять аномалии.
ledge.
Вот эта
I
штука
unzipped the hidden
важна.
pocket and pulled out the silver USB
Подлегче
drive.
будет и пробуждение
A technician sat at a small
приятное.
folding table to my
Если...
right,
два
managing the
пальца в
presentation
рот,
slides. I handed him the drive.
а
Switch
вам
the
это
input.
помогает?
I told him
Может, я
quietly.
как-то неправильно
He
это
hesitated,
делала?
looking at Robert. Switch it.
Мне знаете,
repeated.
что
The
помогает?
tone of an
Не
auditor
два
giving an
пальца в
instruction
рот,
leaves
а
no room for
понюхать
debate.
что-нибудь
He plugged the drive
вонючее.
into his laptop. The massive screen behind me
Вот найти
flickered.
что-нибудь
The
вонючее и
golden anniversary
понюхать.
logo disappeared. The room went dark for a fraction of a second before the projector illuminated the wall. A collective breath shifted in the ballroom. I looked out at the
Помогает
sea of
тем, что
faces.
прочистится.
I saw David sitting with his parents at table 4. Arthur gave me a slow, deliberate nod. Eleanor didn't blink.
Так,
I turned my attention to Jessica. She had stopped smiling. She was staring at the screen, her grip on her champagne flute tightening.
она
I
там
leaned toward the
делается,
microphone.
кстати, производство.
A strong real estate legacy. I began.
Фильтр,
My
аккумулятор.
voice, perfectly
Так,
even,
устройство
is built on
всё, оно не
transparency.
делается.
My father is right. We must understand exactly where our foundations lie.
Всё, пусть...
I pressed the clicker in my
Подожди,
hand.
что это у нее на
The first slide
смене?
appeared.
А, на смене.
The screen
казалось.
illuminated the room in stark white.
Достаточно
There was no
глубоко
festive graphic.
суешь.
There was a
Ну,
clean,
может быть,
black
но
and
у меня
white
еще
flowchart.
ногти просто.
Box A read Emily Hayes, residential escrow account. Box B read
Честно,
Hayes
Маш, в
Holding
прошлый
Firm.
раз просил
Primary
подругу
operating
твоей
account.
это сделать.
Between them was a bold
Тебе,
red
когда
arrow
тебя
indicating a
прям
transfer of
пробило.
$150,000.
Не, мне помогает,
transaction ID,
особенно в
date,
гостях.
And
Ребят,
timestamp were listed below the arrow
вы
in bold
идете в
font.
туалет
The
и
low hum of
нюхаете чужой
conversation in the ballroom
толчок.
stopped entirely.
Все, это
The silence was
сразу.
sudden and heavy.
Сразу
2 days
пойдет.
ago, I said, projecting my voice clearly to the back of the room. The
Как
deposit for my first
помогает
home was
нюхать вонь?
blocked. I was told it was a
Вместо
banking
двух
error due to the
пальцев
expenses of tonight's
просто
beautiful event. I looked at
чтобы-
Robert. His brow furrowed in
Чтоб
confusion.
противно стало.
He
это
stepped
такое.
forward, raising a hand.
Да,
Emily,
ну а что поделать? Это помогает.
This isn't the time for administrative.
Ты
But I am
просто
an auditor.
наклоняешься
I
такой и
continued,
всё.
speaking over him without raising my volume. I don't believe in banking errors. I believe in paper trails I clicked the remote. Slide 2 appeared. It was a high-resolution scan of the family settlement agreement Jessica had slid across the coffee shop table. I had highlighted Section 4, Clause B. The text was large enough for Marcus Vance at Table 1 to read clearly.
Мне вот ни разу не получалось.
Waive any and all rights to access, audit, or contest any financial transactions related to the family holding company. My sister offered to return my money. I told the silent crowd, but only if I signed a non-disclosure agreement blocking me from examining the firm's financial records for the past 5 years. Murmurs erupted near the back tables. A few contractors exchanged nervous glances. Jessica stood up from her chair. The emerald dress suddenly looked like armor that didn't fit. She forced a laugh, a dry, metallic sound that carried across the room. "Emily, you're embarrassing yourself," Jessica called out, waving her hand dismissively. "You misunderstood a standard corporate privacy clause. You always get confused by the legal wording. Let's sit down and discuss this privately." She was trying to deploy the old strategy. Make the paper girl look confused, make her look emotional. I didn't argue. I didn't defend my intelligence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't misunderstand the clause. Jessica, I replied smoothly. I just wanted to know what you were using it to hide. I pressed the clicker. The screen shifted to slide 3. The real audit had begun. I found the document inside the envelope. It was not a grand confession or a letter of apology. It was a formal trust charter, dated 3 months before my grandmother's passing. The letterhead was from a firm in Chicago, an institution I had never heard the family mention. I sat at my desk and unfolded the heavy bond paper. My breath caught, not out of panic, but out of a sudden, chilling clarity. Eleanor hadn't just suspected Jessica. She had mapped her. The trust was an irrevocable trust, specifically designed to protect Mia's inheritance from any family holding company bypass clauses. Eleanor had anticipated that one day, the family firm would be leveraged against the people who were supposed to be safe. She had moved the core of the insurance payout, the real wealth my brother intended for his daughter, into this vault. It was locked. It was secure. And it was designated for Mia. I looked at the signature block. Eleanor had signed it, witnessed by 2 attorneys I didn't recognize. The final paragraph was a specific stipulation. The trust could only be triggered by an external audit if the Standard Educational Fund was compromised. She had built a failsafe. She had left the key in an envelope in my desk drawer. I looked at the blue crayon drawing on my desk. For when I go to college, Jessica thought she was the architect of this family's fate. She thought she was the one pulling the strings, leveraging names and trust accounts to keep her failing commercial project afloat. She was just a player in a game that had been won by a woman who had died 3 years ago. I didn't feel a rush of adrenaline. I felt a profound sense of duty. Eleanor didn't leave me this money to keep it hidden. She left it to be used. She knew that if Jessica ever crossed the line and touched a child's future, I would be the only one with the professional capacity and the personal stake to stop her. I placed the trust document next to the forged withdrawal form. The evidence was no longer just an audit trail. It was a counteroffensive. I wasn't just exposing a fraud. I was securing a future. I reached for my phone. I needed to call the Chicago firm to verify the standing of the trust. The game was over. Jessica just hadn't seen the final move yet. To execute this, I needed David to understand the legal machinery. I laid the trust charter on the desk, pressing it flat with the palm of my hand. "In the real estate world," I said, my voice steady, "people think power of attorney is a skeleton key. They think it allows them to move assets, shift liabilities, and bypass checks. They are usually right, as long as the accounts are standard." David studied the document. But this trust,
У
It's
меня
not a
на
standard
ручках
account.
дверей
I
такие
explained.
вязаные с
It's an irrevocable
косичек
trust.
лапок,
The
и
moment
я
those
их
assets were
стираю
placed in
после
here,
гостей.
they stopped being part of the family firm's holdings.
Спанч
They don't
Боб,
belong to Robert.
скажи,
They
если
don't belong to the firm.
тебя
And they certainly don't
обнимает
belong
твой
to
друг
Jessica.
или
I pointed to the
подруга,
clause stipulating the
или
external audit requirement.
здоровается с тобой
She
за
can't touch it.
руку, ты
She
потом
can't
не
leverage
идешь
it.
мыться.
She can't see the
Сразу
balance.
же.
It is effectively invisible to her system. That's why she went after the surface account. I tapped the forged withdrawal form. She saw the small pool and she drained it. She didn't know there was an ocean underneath.
Я бы дурку
So the
вызвал.
forged signature,
Ну,
David said,
слушай, а
his
может
brow
быть у
furrowed,
тебя
is the
еще
evidence of the crime in the
книжки
surface
в
account.
алфавитном
But this
порядке
trust is the proof that she was
расставлены, или
desperate
там
enough to ignore the
тарелки по
safeguards.
размеру и по
Exactly,
цвету там.
I said. And because the trust has a mandatory external audit
Мы
trigger,
договорились с
once I
другом не
present the
жать
evidence of the fraud from the
руки.
surface account, the trust's independent manager is legally compelled to step in.
Из-за
This was the beauty of the
этого.
process.
Ладно.
It wasn't about me fighting Jessica
Я
in
не
a courtroom
буду
for
это
years.
комментировать.
It was about creating a
ну
sequence
как,
of events where the law did the heavy lifting. I provided the evidence of the
Просто
surface
кто-то
fraud.
много
The trust's
запаривается.
conditions were met. And the independent manager would automatically seize control of the situation. She thinks she's in control because she's holding the power of attorney, I said. She doesn't realize she's
Как
holding a
вообще
dead key.
это оказалось?
David looked at me, a trace of a smile touching his
Да, мы
lips.
тут все грызнули,
She's worried about your
сидим,
reputation,
орки такие.
Emily. She's worried about what your in-laws think. She has no idea she's facing a legal
Не
liquidation.
моемся вообще.
She wanted a battle of optics, I said.
Понимаешь,
Putting the
кстати,
folder back in my
единичное
clutch.
рукопожатие.
She's getting a battle of documentation. The legal process is the only arena where the loudest person
Смотри,
doesn't always
намажет
win.
полный хаос.
The
Ну
person
да.
with the most complete file does.
Подруга
Everything was in
норм, я
place.
только чистили,
The following morning,
убираю.
I met with my attorney, Sarah, in her downtown office. The room
Так,
was sterile,
поняли?
filled
Он
with gray
убирает,
leather
только
chairs and
чистит.
shelves of thick law books. Sarah was a woman who didn't
Блядь,
deal in
так
hyperbole. She looked at the
Так
folders I
же
laid on her
мой
desk,
стол.
one by one. She didn't offer sympathy. She didn't ask how I felt.
Фильм
She just checked
«Планета
the dates,
Капекс» будет
the
полезным.
signatures, and the access logs. This is clean, Sarah said, closing the final folder. The forged signature is a clear case of wire fraud and identity
Так,
theft.
там скоро
The
еще.
IP logs
Блин,
confirm Jessica used her home
57%
network.
только.
The trust charter is airtight.
Я
I don't
в
want a long,
ахуе.
drawn-out litigation, I said. I want the fund restored and the Ponzi scheme dismantled before she secures that Vanguard loan. Sarah nodded. If you present this
Нет,
at the
для меня
gala,
самое
the
главное,
public
чтобы
nature
человеку
of the
просто не
documentation will
воняло.
force the firm's investors to pull back. They won't risk their reputation on a firm with a defaulted mansion and a criminal investigation. I'm not doing this for the investors, I said. I'm doing this for Mia.
Неряха, грязные
I
волосы,
understand,
вообще-то, ну
Sarah
его
said.
такую даже
I'll have a
трогать.
courier on
А у меня
standby.
волосы не
If the board of
выглядят
directors doesn't act
грязными,
immediately
они
after
просто
you present
из-за
the audit,
корней реально
I will
такими
file these with the
кажутся.
district
Я
attorney
даже
on Monday morning.
некоторые клипы
I stood
пересматривала,
up.
думаю, блин, как вы
I
не
don't need the DA's
смотрите
help to stop the
вообще?
gala. You're very calm, Sarah remarked, looking at me over her glasses. Most people would be terrified. I'm not angry anymore, I told her. Anger is emotional. This is just an
Ну,
audit.
кстати,
I took the
ипохондриков,
folders
ну,
and
то
put them
есть
back in my bag.
у
I
Кэрричка в
walked out of the office into
плане
the cool Boston morning.
чистоты
My
у
phone
нас
vibrated
еще
in
не
my
было.
pocket, a reminder for the evening.
2 раза в
If
день
you've ever
хожу,
had to handle a
бывает,
high-stakes
3
confrontation
мыться,
and
но
chose
это
to
на
prepare
самом
with
деле
facts
не
instead of
очень
emotions, let me know in the
хорошо.
comments. The paper girl was ready.
Потому
The gala was in full swing when
что
David and I walked through the doors. The ballroom
это
felt tighter than
самое.
it did the previous evening. Every conversation seemed to stop as
Защитный
we
барьер
passed,
кожи
the guests eyeing
смывается.
us with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Jessica was near the stage, surrounded by a group of investors. She saw me. Her posture stiffened. She leaned into her father and pointed in
Так,
my
они
direction.
сделали?
Robert walked toward us.
Не сделали.
He didn't look
еще.
happy. Emily, he said,
Да,
not greeting David
квантовый
or his
компьютер
parents.
починил.
I told
Она
you
всё
I
равно
wanted this
скоро
night to be about the firm's
пригодится.
history. If you're here to cause a scene, I suggest you leave. I looked at my father. I didn't see a giant of industry anymore. I saw a man who had traded his granddaughter's future for a comfortable lie. I'm here to talk about the
социальная
firm's history.
реклама про гигиену, сцена в конференц-зале в каком-то офисе
Jessica is about
заходит
to give the
толпа
keynote. Robert said,
воротничков,
his voice lowering.
сосущная друг с
Don't you
другом
dare.
вместо
I wouldn't dream of interrupting her.
рукопожатия.
I replied, my
Ты
voice
хочешь
steady.
Да, я
I'm
люблю
just here to
сухой
contribute.
шампунь.
I walked past him
У
toward the
меня есть не
podium.
только сухой
The technician
шампунь, у
stood by
меня
his
есть
laptop.
еще как
I gave him a
гельчик
nod.
такой, который
He
ты
looked at Robert,
намазываешь, он
then at me,
высыхает, и у тебя
then tapped a
типа
key.
башка
The screen
лучше
dimmed.
будет.
The anniversary logo faded away. I stepped up to the mic.
Это более
room went
гигиенично, чем
silent.
рукопожатие.
Jessica retreated to the back of the stage, her face an
Я
unreadable
Басте
mask.
сказал,
30 years,
когда он
I said
хотел
into the
меня взять в
microphone.
гараж еще
My voice didn't
малым.
waver. It didn't crack. 30
А
years of
руки
building a
марать не
legacy
будет.
on
Тебе
handshakes and
такой...
trust.
Я,
My
кстати,
father is
знаете,
right.
что не
This is a moment to
понимаю?
celebrate.
Люди,
I
которые
glanced at
очень
table
любят
one.
чистоту,
Marcus Vance was leaning forward,
вы
his
типа
martini
в
forgotten.
перчатках
But a
убираетесь
legacy,
или
I
что?
continued, is
Потому
only as strong as
что
the integrity of the people
я
who hold it.
чистоту
And for the
не
last 5
особо
years,
люблю,
this legacy has been
потому
systematically
что
dismantled from within. I
для
clicked the
того,
remote.
чтобы убрать
Slide one
грязь,
appeared.
мне нужно ее
The flowchart of my
трогать.
$150,000 deposit.
Вот такая
The ballroom was
хуета.
absolutely
А так
still.
я ее не
I was
трогаю,
ready to
я ее
speak.
не вижу, но
This
она
first
где-то
slide shows the
существует,
escrow
пусть
account
где-то
for my
лежит,
home,
ну и хуй
I
с
said,
ней.
pointing to the red arrow on the screen. $150,000.
По
It
утрам,
was transferred into the primary
туда лучше
operating
с
account for this
вечера
firm.
поломать.
The authorization code came from this
Да,
office.
она будет уже
I
не
looked at
прям
Jessica.
ебать
She was standing by the
свежая,
curtain,
но
her
мне
hands
тоже
gripping the
очень
fabric so
сложно
tightly her
именно
knuckles were
по
white.
утрам
It was an
ломать.
accident. Jessica interrupted, her voice shaking. She hadn't expected me to start with
Вспомнила
the house
твой клип с
deposit.
йогуртом
She
или
thought I was
чем
going to
он
talk
там.
about something vague and emotional. The bank
Рук
moved it to
грязь,
cover an
попа,
overdraft.
руки моются
It
уже.
was
Но
returned
все
to the
равно
escrow
мне
account yesterday.
неприятно вот это
She was
вот
trying to
всё.
normalize it, trying to make it sound like a clerical error. I didn't
Особенно
argue.
вы
I didn't get loud.
убирали за
I just
все
clicked the
говно
remote.
после
Slide 2
попугая.
popped up. It was the email from Patricia to
Ну,
Jessica.
как бы,
Fix this before anyone sees it. It wasn't an
сами
overdraft,
понимаете.
I said, letting the words hang in the air.
Что-то еще
It was a
черебонькаешь, ну так,
diversion,
потихонечку.
and my mother knew.
Мне еще
Patricia stood near
чуть-чуть
the front row.
осталось, и я
She looked like she wanted
буду
to disappear into the
заканчивать.
floorboards.
Сейчас МРТ
She stared at the screen,
сделается.
her eyes wide with horror. Why would you do this to your family?
Кстати,
Jessica
может
asked,
быть...
her voice cracking as she tried to regain control of the room.
О,
Why are you
а,
trying
уже
to ruin 30 years of
21:02,
work because of a temporary
бля.
banking delay? Because it
Может,
wasn't
я их
temporary,
позову
I said.
повеселиться?
And it wasn't just my money. I clicked the remote. Slide 3 appeared.
А,
The
стоп.
forged
Он
withdrawal
не
form from Mia's
сделается.
educational
Это мне
trust.
ручкой
The room
нужно
erupted
было.
in a low, buzzing murmur. I looked at the screen. The date of the signature was highlighted in a bright, glowing box.
Не так
This
часто
is Mia's
собираюсь,
educational
просто
trust,
пыль собираю
I said,
2 раза в
my
неделю,
voice cold.
перетираюсь
The
один
signature
раз в
belongs to my
неделю,
brother.
и робот
I
мой
clicked the remote to the
3
next
раза в
slide.
неделю.
The death certificate. My brother died 17
Знаешь,
days
я
before this
вспомнила
document was
мем,
signed.
типа,
The murmur died. There was a vacuum of sound in the
Чё-то-
ballroom.
а
No
у
one was
тебя
eating.
кот не
No one was
боится
drinking.
пылесоса?
They were all staring at
И
the two
чё
dates on the
такое?
wall.
Так нет, я
Jessica
в
looked
хате
like she had
всего
been punched in the
полгода
stomach.
живу.
She stumbled
Я
back,
ещё не убирался.
the emerald fabric of her dress shimmering under the stage lights. It was a mistake. She gasped, her composure finally breaking. The bank. The bank didn't check the dates. I didn't know.
Или типа,
She was
о,
lying.
Новый год,
The
сука,
ballroom waited for
опять
Jessica
менять
to finish her
постельное
lie.
белье.
I didn't interrupt her. I let the silence stretch, allowing her words to echo against the hard evidence on the screen. She claimed the bank made an error with the dates. I pressed the clicker. The presentation transitioned to the next slide. This is the appendix for the mezzanine credit line your firm secured 6 months ago, I said, my voice carrying over the quiet room. The bank required significant collateral for a loan of that size. I used the digital pointer to highlight a single line of text near the bottom of the page. It listed a dependent beneficiary, Mia Hayes, age 7. You didn't just drain the cash, I explained, looking directly at my sister. You used an orphaned child as a financial shield. You listed her trust status to artificially inflate the perceived stability of your application. You tied a 7-year-old girl to a high-risk commercial debt. A man at table 3 stood up and walked away. The string quartet players looked at each other, lowering their instruments. Jessica's face flushed. The composed executive vanished, replaced by a cornered suspect. She pointed a finger at the projector screen. She stole this, Jessica yelled, her voice shrill, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers. She broke into our secure servers. This is unauthorized data extraction. She is manipulating internal files because she is bitter about her house. It was the exact defense I knew she would use. She wanted to frame me as a jealous hacker. I looked at David. He offered a slight nod. I clicked the remote again. A black command terminal screen appeared on the wall. A single line of green text was circled. I surrendered my administrative access to the family servers 8 months ago, I said. This is the server access log from 2 days ago. It shows the exact moment the files were downloaded. I read the text aloud. Timestamp 2:13 in the morning. The IP address resolves to a residential internet provider in Beacon Hill. Jessica lived in Beacon Hill. I didn't hack the system. Jessica, I told her, my tone devoid of anger. You logged in using my old credentials. You downloaded the files from your own living room, hoping to leave a digital trail that pointed to me. She opened her mouth, but the words failed her. The technical proof was too specific. She couldn't charm her way out of an IP address. Robert took a step toward the stage, his face pale. He looked at the access log, then at Jessica. The blind trust he had afforded her for decades was cracking under the weight of the data. I wasn't finished. The audit required a conclusion. The projection moved forward. The final slide was a visual map. I had drawn it on my office whiteboard, and now it covered the wall of the Boston mansion. It was a web of red and green arrows showing the flow of capital over the last 12 months. A healthy business generates revenue, I said, stepping away from the podium so the crowd had a clear view. A failing business moves liabilities. My house deposit was held to cover an overdraft. Mia's educational trust was drained to pay a commercial contractor. New loans were taken out to pay old interest. I pointed to the center of the diagram. This isn't a real estate empire, I stated. This is a restructuring league. You are using new money to hide old losses. I clicked the remote one last time. A scanned legal document appeared. The seal of the county clerk was visible in the top right corner. It was dated 14 days ago. This is a notice of default. I read. It was filed against this exact property, the house we are standing in right now. The silence in the ballroom turned into a physical pressure. Guests looked around at the ornate walls, the floral arrangements, and the silver trays of caviar. They were standing inside a sinking ship. You didn't throw a 30-year anniversary gala to celebrate history, I told Jessica. You threw it to secure a lifeline. I looked at table 1. Marcus Vance, the senior partner at Vanguard Capital, had stopped swirling his drink. He stared at the notice of default on the screen. His firm was the target. Jessica had spent the evening pouring him champagne, hoping he would sign a new credit agreement tomorrow morning. Marcus Vance set his glass on the white linen tablecloth. He didn't shout. He didn't ask Jessica for an explanation. He simply stood up. He reached down, buttoned his suit jacket, and gave Robert a brief, unreadable glance. Then, he turned and walked toward the exit. Two of his associates stood up and followed him. Their footsteps echoed on the marble floor. Jessica lunged forward, nearly tripping over the hem of her emerald gown. Marcus, please, wait. Let me explain the restructuring plan. The numbers are out of context. Marcus didn't slow down. He didn't look back. He walked out of the ballroom, and the valet attendants opened the doors for him. The sound of the brass hinges clicking into place was definitive. The Vanguard money was gone. The lifeline was cut. Robert gripped the back of a chair, looking at the floor. Patricia covered her mouth with a trembling hand. The facade they had protected at all costs had shattered in front of 200 people. The heavy doors swung shut. A man in a sharp navy suit stood up from a table near the front. It was Richard Sterling, the family's primary corporate attorney. He adjusted his tie and walked toward the stage, raising a hand to signal the audiovisual technician. Turn the projector off, Sterling ordered. The technician didn't move. He looked at me. I gave a subtle shake of my head. The screen remained lit. Sterling turned his attention to me. He used a practiced, authoritative tone designed to intimidate. Emily, what you are doing constitutes corporate sabotage. You are displaying proprietary financial information without authorization. I suggest you step down from that podium before the firm files a formal complaint for damages. He was the false counterattack, the legal shield Jessica always hid behind. Jessica saw her opening. She walked over to Sterling, pulling a tissue from her clutch. She wiped at her eyes, manufacturing a look of profound betrayal. I tried to fix this, Jessica said, her voice wavering. She reached into her bag and pulled out a handwritten note. I drafted a settlement tonight. I was going to give Emily her house deposit back out of my personal account. I just wanted to end this family feud. She held the paper out. It was a bribe wrapped in tears. She wanted the crowd to see a forgiving sister trying to appease a vindictive sibling. I looked at Sterling. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show fear. Mr. Sterling, I said, tapping the remote. A new document replaced the Ponzi diagram. It was an old retainer agreement. Before you threaten me with litigation regarding proprietary data, I said smoothly, you might want to explain this. The document showed Sterling's signature representing Jessica in a private LLC formation. The date matched the week the commercial property began failing. You drafted the shell company she used to move the trust funds. I stated, you represented her private interests while actively billing the primary family firm as neutral counsel. That is a dual agency conflict of interest. Sterling froze. The authoritative posture melted away. In the legal world, representing competing financial interests without written waivers is a fast track to losing a license. He stared at his own signature magnified on the wall. I won't be taking legal advice from you tonight, counselor, I added quietly. Sterling looked at Jessica, then at Robert. He didn't say another word. He turned around, picked up his briefcase from the table, and walked out. I looked back at Jessica. She was still holding the handwritten settlement offer. You offered to return what you took from me, I told her, the microphone carrying every syllable. So I would stay quiet about what you took from a child. The screen faded to black.
У меня
The ballroom
жене
lost its remaining
режет
energy.
высыпание,
The
это
illusion
адски
of wealth and
появляется.
stability had evaporated,
И вот каждый раз,
leaving behind a
почти
room full of
каждый раз я
uncomfortable witnesses.
просыпаюсь, и у меня
Vendors
какая-то
began quietly
новая
packing up their equipment.
хуйня
The catering
появляется.
staff stopped
Из-за
circulating.
нее я уже
A group of
выяснила, что
independent
это из-за нее
contractors,
было.
realizing their outstanding invoices were likely tied to the defaulted
Потому
commercial
что делают
project,
за секции с
started moving toward the
жителями.
exit, murmuring in low, urgent voices. I stepped down from the
Блин,
podium.
получается,
I
качком
unzipped my
стала.
black clutch, dropped the silver
Надо
USB drive
менять,
inside,
да.
and zipped it closed. Robert sat heavily in a
Она
velvet
как бы
chair.
хорошая,
He stared
именно
at his
хорошо
hands.
увлажняет.
For
Но
30
если
years,
попадает
he had
немножко
signed the
на
papers Jessica
кожу,
placed in front of
типа
him.
не на губы,
He had ignored my
а
warnings.
именно вот сюда
He had chosen the
куда
daughter
это
who offered
всё.
him easy answers over the
Сбивает
daughter who
поры,
offered him the truth. Now,
чтоб
he was looking at
качаться
the ruin
даже
of his
во
life's work.
сне, да?
Patricia stood beside him.
Блин,
She wasn't looking at the
прикиньте,
screen
после
or the departing
зала.
guests.
То есть
She was
ты
looking at me.
чуть ли не похоронишь
Emily,
себя под этим
Patricia whispered.
одеялом.
Her voice
Не
was
сможешь
broken.
выбраться.
I stopped walking.
За
I looked at the woman who had
крепатуры.
forwarded a bank fraud alert to protect her social calendar. I didn't feel the old ache for her approval. I felt a quiet distance. You chose the narrative, Mom, I said simply.
Так,
Now you have to read the ending. I didn't wait for her reply. I
тебе бы
walked past the
впало
head table.
вертеться было даже как
Jessica stood
будто
alone near the
бы.
stage. The investors who had surrounded her
Вообще не
20 minutes ago
понимаешь,
were
у тебя
gone.
там
The
такая
emerald gown seemed
влажность,
heavy, dragging on the
как
marble
губы
floor.
пересыхают.
She looked
Есть
at me,
такая тема, что
her
когда
eyes
ты
red, the mask
часто
of the golden child permanently fractured.
используешь что-то
She had
для
nothing
губ,
left to
тебе
leverage.
потом всё
David
равно
was
это
waiting near the
нужно.
brass
Плюс я их
doors.
постоянно
Arthur and
грызу.
Eleanor stood beside him. They didn't look shocked or
И
embarrassed. They
как
looked
бы
steady.
грызу,
Eleanor offered a
мажу,
small,
грызу,
approving nod as I
мажу.
approached. David held out his hand. I took it. His grip was warm and firm. Are you ready to go home?
А
He
ты
asked.
любишь одеяло между ног
Yes,
засунуть?
I
Ну
said.
да, мне
We
кажется,
walked
я
through the
люблю.
doors and out into the Boston night. The valet brought our
Удобненько,
rental
так
car around.
уютненько.
The air was cold, but it felt clean behind us. A 30-year empire was collapsing under the weight of its own ledgers. I got into the passenger
Девчонковые
seat.
песни.
I didn't look back.
Не,
9
я бы
months
такое
later,
поставила,
the rain in Seattle
конечно,
washed
мне
against the
кажется,
floor-to-ceiling windows of my new office.
не особо
The morning light was
зайдёт.
gray, but the space felt
Что-нибудь
warm.
на ютубе поищу.
I sat behind a white oak desk. A brass plaque rested next to my monitor. Emily Hayes,
Топтун.
boutique title and audit firm.
Больно
I took a sip of
ползать.
black coffee and opened the primary ledger file on my screen. The numbers aligned perfectly in their columns. The fallout in Boston had been swift
А
and
мне
clinical.
нравится.
Without the Vanguard capital injection,
Расковырять
Jessica's
близко
mezzanine
это
loans
всё.
defaulted within weeks. The bank seized the commercial properties.
Так,
The
щас
historic family
я
mansion went into
закрою
foreclosure.
шторы.
Robert and Patricia were forced to liquidate their remaining personal assets to avoid federal charges regarding corporate negligence. Jessica's real estate license was revoked pending a state investigation. The golden child was navigating a world where charm could not pay legal fees. But my focus hadn't been on their ruin. My focus had been on the Chicago wealth management firm. The day after the gala, I
Реально,
initiated the
пиздец, я как
external
после
audit clause
смены
written into
чувствую.
Eleanor's irrevocable trust. Armed with the documented proof of fraud on the surface accounts, the independent
Хочется
trustee
просто,
executed their
знаете,
mandate.
какой-то
They legally
детокс
severed
для
Mia's trust from the
мозга
Hayes family holding
устроить.
company. The firewall
Посмотреть
held.
тупую
The creditors who dismantled
передачу.
Jessica's firm could not touch a single cent of the $2 million Eleanor had locked away. I looked at the framed picture on the corner of my
Нет
desk.
еще.
It was a photograph taken last month. Mia was standing in my
Ничего
backyard,
нет,
wearing a
зависит
yellow
от
raincoat,
вашей
holding a
активности.
magnifying glass over a wet leaf.
Кто-то идет
David was crouching
спать,
next to her,
конечно.
explaining how
Фрок
water
уже
tension
вроде
worked.
хочет.
She was safe.
Невилл
Her
тоже
future was
давно
intact.
планирует, но
My
никак
brother's
не
promise
может.
remained unbroken. My phone buzzed on the desk.
Чтобы
A calendar
деградировать,
notification
нужно
reminded
быть
me of a meeting with a new
умным. Я
corporate
хочу
client at 11.
деградировать,
My firm was growing.
пожалуйста.
People in Seattle valued auditors who could see the cracks in the foundation before the house was built. I closed the ledger file. The years of staying quiet. The years of letting my family define my worth. Felt like a story belonging to someone else. I had stepped out of their shadow and built a structure of my own. The books were finally balanced. Sunday morning in Seattle was a quiet routine. I stood in the kitchen of our new house, pouring hot water over coffee grounds. David was in the living room, helping his father, Arthur, assemble a wooden bookshelf he had bought the day before. Eleanor sat at the kitchen island, reading the business section of the paper. She looked up and smiled gently as I handed her a mug. There was no underlying tension in the room. There were no curated appearances to maintain. We didn't have to wear tailored clothes or measure our words to avoid triggering a fragile ego. When my own parents used to visit my old apartment, every morning felt like a negotiation. I spent hours preparing, trying to anticipate Patricia's subtle critiques about my furniture or Robert's dismissive remarks about my career. With them, the goal was always survival. It was never connection. David's family operated differently. They arrived with a box of pastries from the local bakery. They asked how the new audit firm was growing. Arthur asked for my opinion on the bookshelf instructions because he knew I read technical manuals for a living. Eleanor asked if Mia liked her new elementary school. They didn't tiptoe around the events of the gala in Boston. They simply treated it as a closed file. They knew the truth. They stood by my side when the pressure was highest, and they never asked me to apologize for protecting my brother's daughter. Mia walked into the kitchen, carrying a new wire-bound sketchbook. She had spent the last few months living with my aunt on my brother's side, while I navigated the final stages of legal guardianship. But she spent every weekend with David and me. She placed the book on the quartz counter. She flipped to the newest page. It was another drawing of a house, but this one didn't look like a distant dream. It had a bright yellow sun in the corner, and a small brown dog sitting in the yard. Do you think we can get a dog when I go to college? Mia asked, her blue eyes looking up at me. I smiled. I think we can get a dog long before that. Eleanor chuckled and took a sip of her coffee. The sound of David and Arthur arguing playfully over a missing wooden dowel drifted in from the living room. This was what an actual family looked like. It wasn't a biological obligation. It wasn't defined by shared DNA or multi-million-dollar corporate legacies. It was defined by peace. It was built on the quiet. Everyday moments where you didn't have to constantly prove your baseline worth. I looked at the bright yellow sun on the paper. The girl who drew it felt safe. She knew her future was secure, even if she didn't understand the legal mechanics of the trust that protected it. The storm was finally over. I walked into my office on Monday morning. The receptionist handed me the Daily Mail. Among the standard vendor invoices and client briefs, there was a thick manila envelope. The return address belonged to a law firm in Boston. I sat at my desk and broke the seal. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a formal request for financial guarantor assistance. Robert and Patricia were facing the liquidation of their personal estate. Jessica's Ponzi scheme had triggered a cascade of legal audits. The banks were seizing assets to cover the defaulted mezzanine loans. My parents were days away from losing their retirement accounts and their primary residence. Attached to the legal paperwork was a handwritten letter from Patricia. I unfolded the lined paper. A photograph slipped out and landed on my desk. It was an old Polaroid from my 10th birthday. I was sitting at a kitchen table, blowing out candles. Robert and Patricia were standing behind me, smiling at the camera. The letter was short. Emily, we have lost everything. Jessica is facing federal charges. The banks are taking the house on Tuesday. We are still your parents. Please, review the attached guarantor forms. We need your help to save the family. I looked at the Polaroid. It was a
Не,
calculated choice.
правда,
Patricia
если
was trying to use a 30-year-old
какая-то
memory to bypass the reality
бессонница
of the present.
лютая,
She was
тогда
trying to
да.
pull the strings of the paper girl who used to crave
Как
their
дела,
approval.
зай? У
They
меня
didn't write to ask
хорошо,
about
у
Mia.
тебя как?
They didn't apologize for hiding the bank fraud.
Нет, скорее в
They only
среднем
reached out when the
14
consequences
часов.
of their willful ignorance finally arrived at their own doorstep. I didn't feel a surge of anger. I didn't feel a
В
desire to
смысле
call them and
могу?
scream.
Это моя
I pulled a blank
норма.
sheet of corporate letterhead from my drawer.
Если я
I
не
didn't write an
посплю
emotional
12
response.
часов, я буду
I drafted
чувствовать
a
себя
standard legal
как
refusal.
кака.
I formally declined any
Ну
liability
как,
or
я
guarantor
могу
status
10
regarding the
часов
debts of the
поспать,
Hayes
по
holding firm
сути.
or its subsidiaries. I stated that all future communication must be directed to my
Вот, но
attorney.
если
I
8,
printed the
например,
document.
мне будет
I picked up my
мало,
favorite blue
реально.
pen. Blood is a biological fact, but loyalty is an earned
Так,
currency.
живу с
You cannot demand
блокаутом.
rescue from the very person you threw to the
Как
wolves.
телефон проснулся,
Walking away from toxic relatives
А,
is not an act of
темного
cruelty.
попил.
It is an act of preservation.
На голодный желудок.
Sometimes, the only way to find yourself is to cut the anchor that keeps pulling you underwater.
Я даже хочу
I
больше
signed the
спать,
refusal
но
at the
мне
bottom
не
of the page.
выходит.
Legacy isn't what you
Ну,
inherit.
получается,
It
я
is what you protect.
просыпаю то
I
время,
placed the letter in a new
когда ты
envelope and
убираешься.
handed it to my assistant to mail.
У тебя много
Blood had
времени,
asked me to
вот
bleed
и...
again. This time, I answered in
Как
ink.
можно спать... В
If you've ever
смысле,
had to walk away from toxic blood to
спать
protect your own peace,
меньше?
share
Вы
this
реально
story.
восстанавливаетесь
Let's
за
remind
это
each other that a
время?
chosen family built on truth is
Я
stronger
если
than an
услышу
inherited one built on
будильник,
lies.
там, я
The
не
ledger
знаю,
was
часов
closed.
через